For there's so many people in the church world, if they're being oppressed by a demonic spirit, they get dismissed or they get you're told they're crazy or that doesn't happen. So who do they go to?
At this point, were you starting to see into the spiritual realm? Maybe you can explain to the listeners a little bit like what that looks like and feels like.
The younger listeners are like on here right now, just this gets heavy fast.
So my son, River, is really into tech. I was telling you that.
Yeah.
There's a few times, so big, Dad, can I do a podcast? I'm like, sure. So he'll hop in that chair and we'll do a podcast together. And it's like, tell me about life. But his cousin was here. They had a sleepover recently and he's into tech too. And they're like, can we please do a podcast? So I got the lights up and everything for me. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world.
That's
They
awesome.
did like a 20-minute thing on like, different games, Jesus, why he's the most powerful person in the world. And I'm just listening to this, but they're like, Dad, get out of here. You can't listen. I was like, okay. And I just like would kind of listen on the door and it's just like the funniest conversation.
That's awesome.
So.
Jesus, video games, and life. That's all. The big three for kids.
Exactly.
Right?
That's their frame of mind right now. Video games, Jesus. They talk sports about like basketball and River's into basketball right now.
Yeah. Dude, that's right.
A little bit of tennis.
Hey, who's better, LeBron or Jordan? Go.
Yeah. They'll always have the GOAT discussion. Is it Messi or is it Ronaldo?
Right.
Right.
My 4-year-old now, he's always like, Messi's the GOAT.
It's like,
it's funny how much
awesome.
they pick up on stuff too. Like the other day, Griffin was saying something and it was just going on and on and on. And we're like, Griffin, hold on. We're trying to say something. And River goes, guys, stop. Let him cook. It's like, where did this come from?
No way. Let him
like,
cook.
Where were you two?
That's awesome.
Like,
That's awesome.
So how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. This is fun. First of all, just in general, thank you for having me out. And it's always, it's exciting just to see like the difference of people that the Lord is moving in all over the world. And I get constantly surprised by the fact that God is like uniting people, bringing people together all over the world all the time. It's like, it doesn't matter. I was just in Moldova and, just through a random connection, run into a guy, Eugene, who started a basketball club. And we're just like on such a similar level in place with like spirituality and basketball. And it's like, how did that happen? Like I was in Moldova and someone gave me a contact of a guy in Moldova, right where we're staying. And he was just happened to be free all week. And so I just jumped in with his basketball life. And it's like, Lord, like just the unite, it's just,
I love it, man. And that's how we met. I mean, we had one conversation a couple weeks ago and you're like, dude, I could probably cruise out.
Yeah. Why not go to Dallas?
Yeah. So we're here. We had dinner last night. So we were talking yesterday, a lot of our work in the Middle East, like we have and hear some crazy stories.
Yeah.
And after last night and phone call we had, I'm like, you have some of the most insane stories I've ever heard. And I'm fired up to have you on, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Is it Ingalls?
Yep.
Ty Ingalls. Okay, cool.
Little House on the Prairie style.
Nice.
Yep.
Was there an Ingalls player for the Chargers?
I don't know about the Chargers, but there's the most famous one is Joe Ingalls. He's Australian. It's spelled differently.
The basketball player. Yeah. Utah.
It's spelled differently. Yeah, he was with Utah for a long time, and I always got asked if like I'm related to him. I'm like, no, but it'd be cool. Like I'm sure we are somewhere down the line. Like all the Ings are.
He's a fun hooper to watch, man. He's like total dad ball, He
is. It's great. We both have a nice receding hairline, so all the guys are just like, oh, that must be like your brother. It's like, well,
it's like we're not related.
Yeah, I wish.
Well, man, welcome. So excited to have you here. And let's jump into it. Last night we went 100 miles an hour. Let's do that here.
Sweet.
Wherever we want to take this, as deep or as far as we want to go.
Yeah.
Or as nerdy too. We got into some heady stuff last night. So let's start with like 17 years old. You can maybe share a little bit leading up to that, but just what God did to really change the trajectory of your life.
Yeah. So just, in a long story short, like I was in a Christian world, right? Christian bubble. Went to Christian school growing up and, part of our church community and just had an incredible experience growing up, like loved my family, loved our church community. It's a small town of like 400 people. So shout out Ellsworth. We got 400 people and I knew every one of them, it's just like,
that's awesome.
It's like a wild world. But, in that space, like you don't get a ton of outside influence on Christianity. It's just like, we're a small town church and we did our best. And it's like, that's what I knew. And so, I went to a small public school, and life was pretty good. But then throughout my high school career, just I was pretty much a total fake. That was just the way I would describe it, is like, and I wasn't intending to, like, I wasn't trying to fake people. I wasn't trying to lie.
Yeah.
I didn't know the righteousness of Christ. And so it was this constant battle of like, I do something wrong, and then I'm going to try to make up for doing something right. And that was the only worldview that I knew, was this like earn your own righteousness paradigm. And I was smart, and school was easy, and athletic, and all those things. And so it's like
photographic memory.
Yeah, photographic memory. And
insane.
My dad, love him. It was a little insane. Taught me multiplication, division, and how to speed read before kindergarten. And so he would like cross off the unimportant words in my books. So I would just read like the important words. So instead of like the boy went to the park, it was boy went park. And I had to like picture that versus like learn linear reading. And so even now when I read
brothers, sisters?
Yeah. He chilled out for them a little bit. But
oh, are you the oldest? So you got, man, that's funny.
And they're both quite brilliant in their own regard, but he was at least a little bit more tame by the time they came around.
You're like, come on.
Yeah, exactly. It was like
I
the first
number 5 out of 6. So like it was a cakewalk. And my older siblings are like, dude,
what?
We had different parents.
Right. Exactly. No, so just kind of grew up in that culture of like perform. Sure. And you prove your worth, and you perform well, and everything's good. And I didn't have a worldview for the righteousness of Christ. It was always just be better than other people. And so you spend your whole life doing that, and it leads to a really empty, dark place where you can be in and around all that stuff so much and have such deep questions about your own spiritual journey. But no one knows, because I get my first sermon at our church in like 14, so it's just, it ties this and that. And it's like, on the inside, I'm like, if you knew, what happened last night, or, what I'm wrestling with. And so at 17, I was at a youth conference in Florida, actually, and just had this, the word I would use is just a power encounter with Jesus. And, we're all kind of sitting there worshiping, and all of a sudden the room went dark, and there was this booming voice, and I knew it was the Lord. And he just simply said, don't let others do what you've done. And I knew it was a call, first of like, he's real and he's powerful. And so much of the West presentation of Jesus is love, and he is love, and we should do that. But we've lost some of the king, lordship, creator, authority. And I kind of like to talk about how in Genesis, like, Jesus is introduced as creator, and the very next name he's introduced as is the skull crusher. And that's so foreign to most Western Christians, because it's like, he's just like a hippie who, loves people and wants them to do what feels good. And,
and we were talking about a little bit about that last night. Jesus is a friend, and Jesus, or I hate that Christians can kind of like he's a powerful dude, and we water him down to like a, I don't want to say a wimp, but it kind of do, like,
it's not a man you'd follow.
Right.
It's like, men are, as much as this world has changed our perception of men, we weren't designed to follow this little like ninny, it was like,
exactly.
We were designed to follow a worthy king. And I think we've lost that worthy picture of who Christ is, of like, no, he's a worthy king and creator who deserves your absolute loyalty and respect and honor. And on top of that, he loves you so much that he died for you, that he could bring you back into a relationship with him. And that's wild. But when you start with the love, he loves you, he loves you, he loves you. It's like, why? Who is this dude? You know?
Yeah.
So anyways, just had that power encounter with him. And he said, don't let others do what you've done. And I knew at that point I was called to the, church world, the Christian school community, you grew up and things look good on the outside, and it might not be. And so from that time forward, just I have really got to partner with the Lord and finding those people, and whether it's a spiritual Christian background or a nominal or whatever, but they have some recognition of Christ already. but it hasn't become real to them, or there's such shame, fear, or pride and arrogance that they're like, I don't really need him.
Yeah.
And they're just in that self-righteous phase. And so that's been the kind of bread and butter of my ministry. But in all of that, the Lord kind of uniquely gifted me from that point forward. And I don't know uniquely, but whatever. The way of our partnership, I'll put it this way: the way we partner oftentimes is he will show me the different lies and the different, 1 Corinthians 10 calls it the strongholds in your mind that come against the knowledge of God. And so our job as Christians is to tear down these strongholds of the knowledge of God that come against the knowledge of God. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's so sweet because in chapter 7, it says, the weapons that in my right hand is righteousness, and the weapon in my left hand is righteousness. And so we'll kind of get to this as we go into some of these stories, but I think a lot of people will see and hear about some of these stories and say, whoa, that's like cool. That's crazy. And it's like, yeah, it is. But just like Jesus said to the disciples, like, but rejoice that your name is written in the book of life. Like, yeah, you're going to see demons cast out. You're going to see, he's like, I saw Satan fall like lightning, but rejoice that you have been given, the invitation to become part of God's family.
Yeah.
And so when we go out with the message of righteousness, God wants to empower that message. And so those places of lies in the enemy, demonic strongholds, people's minds, he allows me to see those when I'm meeting with people. And so it just sparks that conversation and can undo 10 years of hidden secrets. It can undo 10 years, 20 years of hidden shame. And so that's just where I kind of.
Yeah. So zoom in a bit there on like, you can maybe walk us through a scenario or a story of like, you can see that someone's struggling with, alcohol, weed, and whatever, lust or something.
Yeah. So there's, even the night that I met the Lord, ended up the next day on a bus, and there's a couple guys there, and the Lord, at the time, I didn't even know it was the Lord because we didn't talk about the Holy Spirit at our church. It was, I'm sure we mentioned him, but it wasn't we definitely weren't charismatic,
sure,
in any way, shape, or form. And so, I'm sitting with this guy, and he's a little middle schooler, and I'm 17, and Lord gives me a picture of, it was like his mom, his sister, like I could see the numbers in their house, like his street number, and I could like hear the argument they were having. And I'm like, hey dude, like, did this just happen? Like, is this what your mom looks like? Your sister looks like? Did they just have this argument? And that was pretty hard on you, wasn't it? And he's like, how do you know that? And I'm like, I'm unsure. Like, I don't know.
I'm not sure, but
yeah, it was like day one, walking with the Lord. And so we're sitting there, and he's like, he tells like his buddies, like, dude, this guy can read minds. And I'm like, so the kid's like,
can I?
I'm like, I know. I'm like, what's going on? Like we got a 24-hour drive back from Florida. So I guess we're going to find out.
Yeah.
So he like goes to his neighbor, and he's like, bro, come over here. And it's like, he leans across the aisle, and the guy's like, read my mind. And I'm like, I kind of close my eyes. Like, I don't know what to do. And I see this picture, and this is actually kind of embarrassing considering I've been to Armenia a handful of times, but whatever the like the Russian alphabet is, like they don't use like our letters. And so I see this picture of a building, and it's got like Russian letters on it. And I like grab a notebook, and I like, did these like Russian letters, I drew them out, because that's, I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to even say like it's A, B, it was just like these weird symbols. It
was a clear picture you saw?
Yeah, it was a clear picture of a building. And there was like, windmills in the background, and then, just kind of like this phrase on the side of the building. And so I wrote out that phrase, and he's like, that's the orphanage I was adopted from 5 years ago. And I'm like, okay. Like, just like, again, cool. I guess I can read minds now.
I was about to say, I'm just picturing y'all together. Like, is he just like, his face turned white at that point?
He was shook.
That is wild.
You're like, who's next? Come on up.
Yeah, well, that's why I was like, I don't even know what to do with this, And so I praise God for those moments. The Lord is gracious to me, because I didn't know that it was like supposed to be like let's glorify God through this.
Yeah,
I'm just like, cool. I guess I can talk to people easier now. You know, and you just kind of roll with it. And so I went to summer camp that next summer. So going into my senior year, and that's when some of the more spiritual stuff started happening where, starting to recognize and see when I'm talking to students, like the kids in our cabin, like, what's going on in your story? And the Lord's just like showing me like either a picture or a word or almost like just this feeling of what was happening in their life. And so I'm able to then say like, hey bud, like, is this something you're fighting with right now?
Yeah.
And they're like, you can see the kind of like shock, and it's like, it's okay. Like, I get it. And starting to approach those conversations, and it just entered into so many gospel conversations, because when you open those doors of shame and fear and doubt,
it's been shut for years.
And if you're in a place where like they see that you care and you're authentic about it, and then you just start sharing your own story of your own, whether they're similar or different, like I've been there, man. I've had those thoughts. I've had those fears, like maybe not the exact same story, but it's real. And you just watch like the years of fear and shame just melt and start to have a conversation about like, no, righteousness is from Christ, and he has power to overcome whatever is going on here. And even our first time at camp, we're sitting there talking as counselors, and this is in the cabin at night, and a kid like sits up out of bed and starts like screaming, like, don't get me, don't get me, don't get me. And we're like, what? So like we run over to him, and he's like passed out asleep. We're like, okay. And then another kid across the room wakes up, screams, don't get me, leave me alone, stay away. And like, so we go over to him, and we're like, and he's back asleep. And this goes on for like 4 or 5 dudes. And my junior counselors, I'm 17, by the way, and they're 14. So like, we're not pros. We've got like 10-year-olds in our cabin. It's not like we're not trained or equipped for this. We're just like, we should probably pray for like protection over the kids in our cabin.
Yeah.
Because some spiritual thing is like happening right now. And so we start to pray, and just like things like that started these like trends of, when people are in our cabin or in our house, like we pray, and started to watch how that influenced the spiritual and how we can engage with God in creating these safe places. And I think about our culture and how we've adapted that of like, that's so different than what God desired.
Right.
God was like, I'm going to create a place for you to have dominion where the enemy doesn't have power. And versus like our safe places were like, just keep on sinning and we'll celebrate you.
Right.
Like, wait a minute, that's not exactly what he meant.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just kind of how things started rolling.
So were you, at this point, were you starting to see into the spiritual realm?
Yeah. So
maybe you can explain to the listeners a little bit like what that looks like and feels like, and how you like would use that to break strongholds.
And it's so hard just to have this conversation sometimes, because it's like the way I would phrase things now is totally different than I did at 17.
Sure.
It's just almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's a lot of reframing since then. But, back then the way I would just describe it was you start to kind of get this like sense in feeling where there's more people or, influence in the room than normal. Right. And so it's like the little details of like, everyone's thinking about this, but I'm feeling or sensing this thing. And you watch a kid or a person's face change a little bit, and you're like, maybe, I want to go kind of like ask a question. And so a lot of times I'm honestly just asking questions from the Lord, and like, I'm starting to see this. And I think there are people that really see into the spirit like a ton. I was more like, I would see different pictures sometimes in my mind. And it wasn't like I would like look in a corner and there'd be this 12-foot tall demon. And that's happened like 4 times in my life where I like physically saw a spirit and was like, well then, hello. But for the most part, it was, you kind of close your eyes, or almost like the Lord gives you like an overlay of the spiritual powers in the room, in the spiritual locations that had influence of sorts. And so you kind of get at first it's almost a fearful, like, whoa, there's something else here. And then you quickly like, wait a minute, I don't need to be afraid, but I do need to address this. And so that was kind of how it all started. And when I did later at 19, got filled with the Holy Spirit, and that was when I started to kind of more hear the different demonic lies, and where I could literally hear the voices and the phrases that the spirits were like saying to a person. And so I would often ask, like, do you hear like this lie, or do you hear this phrase, or do you just feel like this? And would, whether it's you're never going to be good enough, or you're going to be like your dad, or, I'll never be free, or whatever those repetitive, pervasive thoughts were. Yeah. And that's when that, actually, I believe it's 2 Corinthians 10, now that I'm rethinking about it, but 10:3-5, but
you're good. That's all good.
And just like tearing down those strongholds. And so it's weird because it's not a one-time thing. It's like sometimes there's a picture, sometimes it's a phrase, sometimes it's a true spirit you're seeing, but it's a combination of like you're in this other realm and you're engaging with it. The Bible calls it kind of the second heaven, or the the spiritual realm, or whatever. But I would say the interactions there's not like a one size fits all. Sometimes it's picture, sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's like all of a sudden you get this feeling come over you and you're like, that's not a feeling that I'm like, I'm realizing it's not a feeling I normally have, or it's like disconnected from my own feeling or fear or temptation. And it's like, hold up. And you kind of look around the room and you're like, that's you. I'm going to go over there.
So at this point, the Lord's preparing you, and you're still kind of learning your way around everything. That obviously, like the orphanage thing probably blew your mind, just like it blew everyone else's. And so I love to feel free to keep going. You were talking about summer camp. If you wanted to hit anything there, do you want to keep going there?
Yeah, just one more thing on that. And I just want to say too, like, I'm just going to use summer camp collectively. There's actually like 4 or 5 different camps that all these things happened at. Yeah. But just for the sake of not exposing someone's personal story or a situational story that
don't want to put them on blast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is kind of a combination of various camp experiences, and but the real formative time though was when we kind of teamed up with a couple other people that had a similar gifting at camp, and that's when things started to like make sense. And because we were doing it together, we were able to talk through things. And I share this story often, but I didn't know much about speaking in tongues or anything of the sort. And I'm at a camp, and it's a Wesleyan like congregation, so you can't, like, they don't speak in tongues generally. And anywho, so I'm like up front worshiping, and all of a sudden I kind of run out of words, and I'm like, and I just felt this like need to keep singing. And so I tried to keep singing, even though I like choked up and ran out of words, and all of a sudden I wasn't singing in English. And so I kind of like, put my hand over my mouth quickly. So I'm like, I don't really know if I'm supposed to. Like, I have no idea. I'm like still like a little like, this is all new to me. Like I'm not, whatever. But, and so one of the other counselors comes up, and she's like, hey, I just saw you in the spirit, like leave where you're standing at, and like go over and fight away like these 3 different demons that were chained to this boy in the back. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, she's like, go talk to him. And I'm like, about what? And she's like, now this is a 12-year-old boy. And she's like, weed, suicide, and pornography. And I'm like, like
he's not smoking weed.
I'm like, okay. And so like I kind of walk over to him, just, gently approach, and like, it's like the first or second night of camp. I don't know who this kid is. I mean, I had seen him obviously, but he's not my cabin or anything. And so we start talking and diving into stuff, and it's like, I start praying for him and just kind of sharing gently, and start to like ask him deeper questions. And it's like, dude was like, getting weed from his dad, watching pornography with his family, and was had attempted suicide. And it's just like, whoa. And so I had to minister to him and just start praying over him and watching those chains just like fall off. And then watching his whole personality shift, where you're just like, dude just went from like this, like in the back, like just heavy, to like full participation in the greater community. And I actually got to baptize him later that week, which was super cool. And just started to see that like, this is actually for ministry, not for like a cool trick to like entertain people.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's where people get hung up, because it feels like a trick. And it's like, and I don't say this to boast, but I'm like, I've been doing ministry now for, almost 18 years, and not a day goes by where I'm not sharing the gospel with people. And it's like, so I have some cool stories, but it's like, I've got, 20,000 hours of this, and I've got like, 10 hours of cool stories.
Yeah.
So like I can go on, but it's like, this is, most of the days it's just like, no, the gospel is totally sufficient. And this is meant to open doors to the conversations for Christ to become their Lord, and for them to see the power of God, because we've really stepped out of, it's the 70s and 80s, where it's like, you just try to convince people about who God is. And we know this from all over the world. It's like, people are no longer convinced by a mental argument. It's no longer the season of apologetics.
Yeah.
People want to see power. And so when you walk in and you're like, yep, here's the power of God, and they see it, they're like, there's something there.
Right.
And then the door is opened, like, no, he's the worthy king. He's the creator, and he's made a way for us to be part of his family, but you must repent to be baptized and follow him. And otherwise you're going to be part of this world in a really dangerous place, which is called the enemies of Christ.
Yeah. I mean, like, to your point, when Christians come to our door and like want to tell us about Jesus, it's like, dude, I'm a follower, but get out of here. Like, it's like, we have this, we got to argue people to Christ, and that's not how you win people over.
Right. Especially in today's day and age.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So, fast forwarding a bit, let's get into some of those stories we were talking about last night. Maybe want to go Eric, one. That's a good one.
I'll go one more before that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Just kind of like a mid-range.
All right. Yeah. Stepping stone.
Exactly.
There we go.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's kind of work our way into some stuff there. During that next, whatever that was, 10, 12 years, like I was so burdened by the lack of like the warrior heart in the church, of like, we just skipped that. And so my joy and aim was like, I want to raise up warriors who are ready to go. And that led to like a lot of fun challenge in my own life, because in the church world, warriors aren't celebrated, right? Like, we've made the most docile church world of all time. Like, the men are just like, what's your highest calling? I park people in the parking lot every week. Like, whoa.
It's not a job for the faint or weary of heart.
And it's like, don't get me wrong. Like, I praise God for those people, right? Like,
and serving's great. Absolutely.
It's just like, that's the highest calling. And like, and I say this all the time, we have elders in the church who've never baptized someone. How could you be an elder and not baptize? Like, that seems like a foundational like part of being spiritually mature, is that you've had a child, You've like,
that's a good point.
Done the one thing you're supposed to do. Like, he's like, all authority in heaven has been given to me, therefore make disciples, baptize them, and teach them to obey. And you're like, I give a lot of money to my church for other people to do that.
People are good at the disciple part in church.
Yes.
Go
sometimes.
And make disciples. Yeah. Sometimes some, but the go into the ends of the earth, not as much, some better than others, but the baptizing too.
Yeah. It's a command.
It is a command. And that is interesting that you say that some staff leaders in church never done that.
Yeah.
It's almost like they like reserve that for the pastor.
Yeah.
Like
the professional, the trained.
Yeah.
Which creates just a bottleneck, right? It's like, if you want to be participating in ministry, you have to go through this, qualification ritual we call seminary, for the most part, and a handful of them don't, but there's some form of schooling and system that you have to go through to participate in ministry.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the amount of times I get in trouble a lot And if you know some of the other side of my life, I'm in trouble often. And it's always with the church. It's like, it's never like, and I wish I'm like, man, I want to someday like, it's like I do plenty of things wrong. Like we can talk about those too.
Yeah.
But it's like, you had students baptizing students. Like that's not in the book of church order. And it's like, that's what you're mad about? Like that kids took their faith seriously? Or
people can get caught up in some of our work. We'll see like, there was one guy who was a former Muslim, got baptized, was willing to die for his faith. And then there was a church we took out to Israel, and they're like, well, I mean, what like sect of Christianity is going to be? And like was like caught up in so many of the details.
Yeah.
And it was just like, this dude's literally ready to die for his faith, and his family's probably going to disown him. Yeah. And potentially there could be a fatwa on his head.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what denomination he's gonna, like some of those details, man, we get way too wrapped up into.
Right. And even like the cessationist thing, that's kind of fun. Like in our neck of the woods, like, well, spiritual stuff's not, that doesn't really happen today. And it's like, for you, but you're going to tell me that 50 to 70% of the Christian world is like, they're just all liars and making up these stories from all over the globe.
Right.
Like, every believer that's come to faith through a seeing a man in white or a sign and wonder or a healing in India or someone raising the dead or the power encounters you have in Africa. Like that's just all.
And people think that happens there. Not
it's
here.
So weird. It's just like,
it is strange.
And then have a, cessationist, like, well, the Holy Spirit doesn't really do that now. And it's like, that's pretty offensive to like most of the Christian world.
Yeah.
You might be accepted here in, in my neck of the woods in West Michigan, but it's like, it's kind of offensive to like everybody else.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we were talking about it last night, there's just some gnarly stuff that goes on really in the mission field too, all around the world. But I do think the West, we're easy to dismiss it and to say that happens there, it won't happen here. Yeah.
And this is why I want, before I go into some of the crazy stories, this is the piece I wanted to go to, is that for there's so many people in the church world that are having spiritual experiences and they have no one to talk to. Like, where do they go? If they're being oppressed by a demonic spirit, what do they do? Right? Who do they talk to? And they get dismissed, or they get you're told they're crazy, or that doesn't happen. So who do they go to?
Yeah.
They're going to have to go outside of the church to find the answers to the spiritual world. And it's like, we have the answers. We have an all-powerful spiritual God who created us, who lives outside of our dimension, clearly.
Yeah.
And we can't answer questions about the supernatural and spiritual realm. And so much of our ministry, there's a definite people group that are reached by traditional Western ministry, but there's an entire people group that it doesn't answer it for them. And they're having real spiritual encounters, whether dark or light, but primarily dark, and they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
They have nowhere.
And sometimes they'll go to like New Age stuff, right?
Yeah,
they'll look
New
for,
Age
and we were talking about this, like you don't fault people for, or if they have experiences, they're looking for something, they're looking for a connection. They're looking for something greater than themselves. And a lot of times they can look in the wrong area.
Yeah.
Or like you're saying, the church isn't equipped to help people that maybe need help with dealing with demonic spirits and spiritual warfare.
Yeah. We had a, kind of in my little West Michigan, Northwest Michigan community, we had a couple stories, just give two quick ones. And then we'll dive into the wilder ones. But, when I was so I lived at a house, and they had some younger students that with a family that lived there. I was living with their family before I found my own house when I moved. And one of their buddies came over, and we're praying one night just like before bed, and it's kind of late, and all of a sudden he like starts like full on manifesting. And now none of the kids that they're with know anything about that whole world, right? I mean, very limited and whatnot. And this guy, this kid, he's 15, on his knees, on his hands and knees, growling at us, like foaming at the mouth, like crazy, like not responding to us. And so we just start praying in the name of Jesus, and praying over him, and he starts coughing and coughing and coughing, and there's the Lord's kind of like guiding me and showing me some particular spirits to pray against. And so I'd pray against that spirit, and he would like go into this little like coughing fit and then kind of relax and then re-engage in some of the antics. And so I'd pray for the next, thing the Lord showed me. And he just really like glorifying God in this, like, Christ, you have all authority and power, you have dominion. And we want to see this young man free.
Yeah.
And so finally, he gets free, and you can just see, and he like comes back and he's like, "Are you guys okay?" And we're like, "Are we okay?" Like,
we're fine.
We're great. I mean, a little shook up.
Bro, are
like,
you okay?
Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, thank God." And we're like, "You're like, what?" And he's like, "I had to get down on my hands and knees because everything in me was trying to tell me to throw you guys out the window." And we're like, "Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks for not throwing us out the window."
And he's like, and then all of a sudden he's like, I felt like spiders were like crawling out of my throat. And we're like, and that was the coughing fits he would have. And we're like, "Bud, like, what's been going on?" And he's like, "Okay, I'll just tell you." He's like, "For the last 6 months, every single night, a spirit will come to me in my dreams and tell me to kill myself." And he's like, "Last week I took the crossbow that I was out hunting. It was deer season. And I turned it on myself and I fired it, and the bolt shot and it hit me, and it stopped right here. It just stopped like mid-flight." Like, he's like, I reached out and like turned on myself, shot it, and it launched, and it hit my neck, cut me, and then just stopped. And he's like, "I know that God spared me, but I've seen this thing every night, and it's just every time I go to bed, I can't get away from it. It just shows up, and it'll look in my mirror, look in my window, and tell me to kill myself." And this is a good kid in our youth group, football guy, you know what I mean? Just normal dude.
Super unassuming.
And he gets delivered and ends up, just like different trajectory for life. And it's like,
praise God, man.
It was so sweet. And it's just like, man, those kids, and not just kids, but adults, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's not every kid, but man, it's more than you think, and that are going through stuff like that. And if we're not the ones who are reaching out to them, we know how it ends, And so I just have really felt called to that. It's the hidden, they're in the, Christian schools, they're in the youth groups, they're in the churches. And what are you doing when you have that every night?
Right.
Who do you tell? So anyways, that's just kind of how it progressed. And then from there, we've just seen, powerful encounters from that time forward. And again, with the heart of like, God came to set the captive free.
Yeah.
He came to bring back dominion, and he assigned us as his ambassadors to go.
Yeah.
And we've been given the spirit of glory and the spirit of power and love and self-discipline. Yeah. And man, we need it. Yeah. We need him.
It's reminding me of Isaiah 61 right now, bind up the brokenhearted, break chains. I mean, truly, like, what you guys are doing is incredible, man.
Yeah. It's been really fun. And so, and then you get some of those stories that get a little bit out there, and
which will hook people in for sure. But and we're talking about this is not to dance in the darkness, it's expose that darkness to light. And could be faith builders for people. It could be things that bring people in, like, these guys that saw, this dude foaming from the mouth, he's on all fours, like the guys that were seeing that, what a testimony is that to them, going, man, there's definitely something darker at play. We should probably be serious about this.
Yeah.
This man, Jesus, and the good and bad that's in this world.
Exactly.
This is not talked about. And I think so it's good to talk about, hey, how can we look at this with like, hey, like, okay, a biblical lens, but also too, I understand, hey, not to be scared of it either. I think some people are just so scared, hey, let's not even talk about it. It's just too out there, like I'm just going to pretend like it didn't exist, And I think
or if I do talk about it, it's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Or if I try to get into it, I might get exposed.
From a Western point of view, like the challenge there to how do you broach this topic well with them, for those who may be skeptical, but also too, like, because maybe like kind of like you said, people are like, oh, you're just into the whole sensationalism side of the thing, or you're just doing it's performance, or it's a show, Because I know a lot of people who feel that way about that too. And so how do you balance that? I think that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah. This is not the right answer for everybody. I want to make that really clear. Like, if you're listening to this thing, like, this is not the right answer for everybody. But my heart has always been as a pioneer. And like, if I see something that's worth it, I will happily run alone and go first.
Yeah.
And it's heavy at times, but for the most part, I'm like, I'm just going to go do it. I can't wait for everyone else to come to the same conclusion. And I pray for those like first followers that then come behind. And then you have your early adopters, then you have the masses. And we're heading that way. I was sharing that, like you shared, you had LA on here.
Yeah.
A couple weeks ago or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I was listening to him in 2013.
Which is crazy, dude.
Yeah. And so those guys are, some real pioneers, but, and I was heavily influenced by Derek Prince, and, doing ministry over the globe and deliverance ministry and stuff, and just but a heavy love for the word. And so I started seeing this stuff in the Bible, and I read Heiser's book in 2017, and it messed me up.
Was it Hidden Realm or something?
Yeah, the Unseen Realm.
Unseen Realm.
Yeah, and
Hidden Realm might be Mutamala. He's got one coming out.
Okay. Yeah. And honestly, I'm just sitting there like reading it, and I'm like, I had to reread through the whole Bible, and I'm like, this is everywhere. Like, this is everywhere. I'm like, we've just completely removed the supernatural. And I'd had experiences, so I had things to hang, like stories to remember and to learn from. But now I had an entire skeleton of biblical narrative of like, this is from the very beginning. And we see it all through scripture. Every story has these supernatural, spiritual elements.
Yeah.
And I just missed it. And so when I reread through the whole Bible, I'm like, okay, I'm cool. Like, if no one believes me, if no one follows, like, I'm good because I see it in the word, and that's what I need to run hard.
That's the ultimate authority.
Yeah. And then my prayer is like, I don't expect people to follow me. It's fine. I just need a couple people that will be first followers, and then the masses follow those guys a whole lot easier. Yeah. But I'm comfortable just being the pioneer of like, I'll be the weird one. I'll be the guy that you call when things get uncomfortable, and, I was at a Christian school, and a parent called me in the middle of the night one time, and they're like, can you come over? Like, our son, is going through this like crazy spiritual thing. And they're like, we know that you pray differently. And I'm like, on my way, like,
you have a direct line to God.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what that means, but I know what it means, and, I'll just really quickly, one more story. I was sitting in a board meeting for down in it was a financial office, and we're in this board meeting for a camp thing, and I don't even know these people. Like, I knew one of them, and it was like a first introduction, and my phone rang, and they're like, "Oh, you can answer that." And I look at, and I'm like, "It's a youth pastor from the area." And I'm like, I turned it over, and I just jokingly said like, "Oh, it's a youth pastor. Probably supposed to talk about like basketball or some dumb event. And if he calls me back, it's because they want me to do deliverance ministry, and they have no idea how." And I've just like jokingly said that because like that's pretty much all the calls I got from ministry at the time. And he called right back, and I'm like, "Hey, what's up, man?" He's like, "Dude, there's a dude here at our church, like snake, like writhing, like hissing, like." And
Get
I'm
here
like,
now.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I guess that was what I called. And so, I go to their church, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you guys have people that do yoga, and it's like he was doing yoga and got the, at the time I didn't know anything about yoga. I didn't know, I'd never practiced, never tried it. But the Lord gave me a word, like a serpent spirit kind of thing. And so I started looking up like serpent spirit, and it's like the name is a Kundalini spirit, and it's like it's connected to yoga. The goal of yoga is to become enlightened and line your chakras up to where you can receive this Kundalini spirit. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what it is. So we start praying, and this dude's like writhing on the ground and ends up getting delivered. And like 6 months later, I one of the students that I knew from there was speaking at his like youth group. Yeah. So I show up at the church like couple months later to go say hi to this kid, and the pastor in the church he's like, "What's going on? Why are you here? Like, did something happen again?" And I'm like, "No." And like there was this thing, they literally called me like the demon hunter or something ridiculous like that, and I'm like, that's nuts.
Who are you gonna call when demons come?
It was just such a funny like, oh, the church is so ill-equipped to love their own people.
Yeah.
But in ways that they do a lot of great things, but just like in this particular area, it was just
I'm curious too if that story there, like, was this person I was doing yoga, like, what was their life like? Was their life relatively normal before that? Just boom in that moment, just overcame them. Like, tell the listeners,
good question.
Yeah, what
were they
their,
getting into before to?
Yeah, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, and I don't know his whole backstory. I mean, like, I didn't know this guy. I just was literally like, that was one of the handful of times where I'm like, hired arms type thing.
Okay,
just come in. Like most of the time, it's the people that I'm walking with, and then I'm getting to hear their story. But I know that he had lost his job and then was trying to find some like self-help to cope with anxiety and to cope with some of the depression. And they start doing these like, let's get a workout rhythm, and had a counselor. And I don't know, I want to be very careful when I say this next statement. I think there's like it's percentages really matter to me, and I make them up all the time. So this is a totally made up stat. But in the counseling world, there's probably like 60% that I just would tell you it's a waste of time, because it's like they're just going to give you like your classic psychobabble. There's 20% that actually understand biblical principles to bring true healing and true like godly righteousness into anxiety and depression. Then there's another 20%, and this number is growing, that are openly teaching you to engage in spiritual practices as a modality of healing. And so he had been connected with one of those types of counselors who's like helping him open doors to the supernatural. And again, those numbers are totally made up. I'm just saying in that whole space, there's a growing number that are like, let's do these spiritual modalities of healing. Some are just talking to you and giving you worldly principles you can find in a psych book. There's 20% that are like using the word of God to like bring about healing. And I'm like, praise God for those people.
Yeah.
But I think it's a pretty small number.
Well, it's interesting too. Like, you think about like a lot of these people who are having these spiritual encounters, like they're at a vulnerable state in life a lot of times. I mean, that's not always the case, but just very interesting. Where they're like open to like outside help. So that's interesting. Like maybe like it gets more blurry then when it comes to the spiritual realm, where they're more open to versus just their own intuition and their oan.
Shout out to blurry creatures.
But one day I'll meet those guys and be on the show. But no.
They're amazing dudes. Yeah.
Anyway, it is side story. But I was just curious about that.
Yeah.
So
in just to that end, it's like you see people when you get to a place where anything in life becomes so repetitive and heavy, it's just opening doors for the spiritual and the supernatural, right? And so it's like, it doesn't matter what it is. Those addictions, those, temptations become open doors, and the sin becomes an open door for all the different spiritual things that want to creep in. And so the more you're in that space of anxiety or depression or addiction or whatever, you're just like, it's like opening the door every night and being like, if you leave your door unlocked one time, the chance of someone coming in is pretty unlikely. But if you leave your door open every night, it's like
chances go up.
The chances go up,
someone's going to come through.
Right. Yeah. That's a good analogy. Yeah. I like that, man. Yeah.
So, I'll be quiet for a second.
No, you're good.
I can keep rolling for days.
I know. Keep going, man. Well, I think what we should do with this episode is let's just share different stories, and then we'll get to that one in a sec. And then we'll just keep people drawn in until the end. No. Okay, I have a list of so many good ones here, but yeah, if we want to get to that one with Eric, that's like a pretty crazy story.
One, yeah. So this was last summer. There's a group of high school guys that wanted to go up on a little like retreat to learn some disciple making stuff, and so my buddy and I go, and we spent I think it was 2 days, but maybe it was 3 days. I don't know. It doesn't matter. So anyways, we're on our way home from this little excursion, just talking about disciple making and what it looks like to make disciples in their school, and just pretty normal run of the mill. Like we played some spike ball and we sat around the fire and talked about Jesus, and it was awesome, right? Just a good time. And we're like, well, let's go, instead of taking the highway back, let's take a little side road. And we get to this little city and kind of felt the Lord say, like, stop here and just go on prayer, just do some prayer walking, and generally speaking, like prayer walking is like 2 by 2, not required, but it generally is. Well, we had 3 boys And Neil, who's my buddy, he was like, he saw someone and he's like, I'm gonna go talk to that guy. So like he ran off. Like we like pull up in the side of the road and he's like, I'm going to that guy. And so like he just runs away and we're like, all right, bye. And then the three boys are like, yo, Ty, is it cool if we like go together and not with you? And I'm like, sure. Like, fine. And so I kind of moved out from the more.
I'll be in the car.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, all right, fine. So I'm like, you know what? Do you guys know Laura Sanger?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever spoken with her, read her stuff, but she talks about spiritual mapping. And do you guys know Neil Cole?
I've talked to Neil.
Okay, awesome, good dude.
Zach connected me.
Yeah.
Shout out to Zach, which is a connection.
Yep, my guys.
Duke, he was on a few episodes ago. World Cup Dad.
Yep, World Cup Dad. Check out his episode.
Yep.
He's been one of my best friends for a long time here, and so, anyways,
and he was there, right?
This was not
separate.
This time.
Okay.
Yeah. So we actually went back, and so kind of just giving some of the parameters for this, but I was like, well, I guess I'm going to go spiritual map instead of prayer walk. Like, and so instead of becoming like more evangelistic of let's go find some people to pray with and just share with, like, I'm just going to go get kind of like a spiritual map of this town. And I've done that in the past and it's been usually fruitful. So I'm like, I'll just see what happens. And so I start walking the street and come to this bookstore and like they're selling like wands and magical items and crystals and their whole booksection. They have a whole book section on witchcraft. And I'm like, that's probably a good place to stop. So I like walk in and it's like this little shop, tiny little shop. And I kind of start walking to the back and I'm like, this place just like way bigger than it should be. And like you like turn down an aisle and you're like, there should be like a wall here, but the aisle just like keeps going. And there's another corner and like another, and you're like, and you can just sense like there's up front, like the openness to witchcraft, but you can sense in the back it's just there's more, but you're seeing normal books and you're seeing historical books and you're kind of like, okay, but then you go down these hallways and they just like keeps getting larger and you're like, what is happening here? Like, I'm just confused. And so I go talk to the woman and I had this sense that she was pretty spiritual, but like she's not letting on into anything. And I'm like, you're selling like witchcraft books and like you have wands and crystals on the front counter. Like,
definitely.
She's like, no, like we're just like, I just think it's kind of cool. And I'm like, oh, whatever. So I asked her, I'm like, who are the people I need to meet? Like, I use the word power brokers. Like, who are the people that have power in this town? And she's like, you need to go to Market 41 and you need to go to the inn and meet Eric at the inn. So I'm like, all right, cool. Well, I go look for the inn, but I can't find it. So I end up at Market 41 and flash forward, I meet the owner. She was like in the back of the shop and she had a couple of books, one by Jimmy Winship on the shelf.
Yep.
And the people that like had that shelf there, because it was like a market, so you could all like sell your stuff, were two friends that I had back in like 2017. This is 2025. So last summer. And I'm like, do you know these two ladies? And they're like, yeah, we do house church together. And I'm like, no way. Like I was teaching, like I literally talked about house church like in 2018 or something. And apparently they'd all started house church up here, out of town. I'm like, that's so cool. So I started asking her some like history and of the town and what's going on with the city. And she's like, it's a really dark place. And I'm like, I've heard some things and, but they just like love Jesus and love the Lord. And so it was like really cool to be like, okay, there's a church community here that's actively trying to like push back the darkness, but they're surrounded like on every front. And this next statement, I just want to, if the younger listeners are like on here right now, just this gets heavy fast. Mm-hmm. And so in this city, I knew that from a very reliable source that every year on Halloween, the witchcraft coven, the Satanists or whatever in the area, they would sacrifice a human child. Gosh. And so I knew that there was power here, and I knew that there's tons of drugs. Immense and like darkness. And even like if you go to like the news station, you can like look up, in this town, they found like 67 goats or 66 goats that had been like ensanguinated, the blood drained out of them and found in a ditch. And everyone's like, who would do this? It's kind of like they're trying to terrorize the local farmers. And it's like,
no, man,
bro,
they're doing some
like,
gnarly
this wasn't
stuff.
like some like bad movie where they like go and take a sheep and do weird crap to it.
Did
like,
you mention the name of are you wanting to keep it?
Yeah, I can share it. Yeah. Newaygo, Michigan.
Okay.
And so I'm like, we know this stuff's happening here. Like, and it's like deep and dark. And so I go over to the inn and the guy that greets me comes out and, like he's long blonde hair. He's like wearing like, looks like threads he'd made himself, and like the, open chested, long, nasty fingernails. And you're like, in the scent. And again, sorry, but it's the scent of like blood and feces. It's that like death scent. And you're like,
decaying.
Yeah. And you're just like, we're sitting outside. And I'm like, thank God. Like, and I'm like, kind of leaning back, like, oh man, that's a strong aroma. And so I'm like, hey man, I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. I'm here on a spiritual map quest. I hear that you know some stuff about the spiritual happenings in Newaygo and have a history of the spiritual stuff. And he's like, you can just see he's like, doesn't have a lot of friends, and definitely open to telling me about the history of all the spiritual things. So he goes down and, starts sharing like, the women were here from Chicago and, blah, blah, blah. It's a river town. And so we had the logging industry and, he's making a point to reference that there's like a homosexual crew throughout the history and a witchcraft crew throughout its history without like saying too many details. And so I'm just kind of egging him on, like, well, tell me more about that, and because I'm aware of the depth of darkness and spirituality in this town, but I don't want him to know that yet, because I'm just a casual spiritual tourist. I heard your place is haunted. And so he's telling me about some of the hauntings and things that have happened and the things people see. And he's like, yeah, there's a portal under the bridge. And like, you can like put stuff in the water here and it'll show up like upstream, like a mile and a half. And it's just like weird and cool. And he's like, there's an underground, place they practice magic. And he was like, yeah,
so he's giving you,
he's
a
like,
lot of
historical facts, and he's just like excited to tell me. And I'm a good listener in those sides. Usually I'm not a good listener. Usually I'm a talker, as evidenced by this podcast so far. But
no, dude, that's what's great.
Yeah,
I love it, man.
I told them they're gonna have to edit some of this content out to trim it down. But so anyways, he's just going through it and he's telling stories and he's like, yeah, so, and I think this is where things got, kind of took a shift. And I'm like, so that's all cool, man, but like who are the power brokers now? And he's like, well, there's 3 groups. And the first one he said is there's the blatants. And he's like, the blatants are those who they look like they're practicing, like they're witches, right? They got the black hair, they got the purple in their hair, they got the little, upside down pentagram on, and, they're carrying around a magic spells book, and they're just kind of like, they're blatantly into witchcraft. And he's like, they're dabbling at best, if not just,
not someone you need to truly.
Yeah, don't think about them. Like, don't worry about them. Like, just let them do what they do. Like, who cares? And then he said the next group of people, he said there's those of us who practice, magic. And I was like, well, aren't those, so I'm kind of trying to get a clarification of, what he means by that. And he's like, he basically, again, it's probably a 10-minute thing compressed into one sentence, but the people that are using blood and sex, the 2 covenant makers in the spiritual realm, to create contracts and to have spiritual power. So they're doing sacrifice, whether human or animal or whatever, or they're using sexual, brokenness to engage in these spiritual contracts and offer life and whatnot. And he's like, yeah, there's those of us that practice magic. And I'm like, us? Interesting. And he tells me about a spiritual meeting they have every month or every week, excuse me. And he's like, yeah, 2 of the local pastors are part of this thing. And of course it's like the 2 churches with the rainbow flag out front. And, like, of course, but it's like, he's telling me they're practicing blood magic together every week. And I'm like, you're just cool sharing that. And, and again, I'm still doing a good job of playing like the whoa, that's interesting. Like, what kind of powers do you get?
Yeah.
Like just like egging this dude on. And so things kind of, go, and he's got some, like, you think I've got wild stories, like this dude's got some wild stories. And
Sure.
he's like, and then and then he said, there's the last group of people are the people that he's like, it's okay if you look for them, but if they start looking for you, you're in trouble.
What's up, guys? We are going to pause the conversation here. You want to come back for part 2. It's insane. I'm on the go. As you notice, I'm out in the studio. Us Nomads are always on the run. I'm very excited for you to come back and hear the rest of the story.